Okay, I'm delighted to be joined today from Lausanne in Switzerland by Professor Marc Gruber. And Marc is a leading international researcher on entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology commercialization. He's also the author with Dr. Sharon Towle of Where to Play, 3 Steps for Discovering Your Most Valuable Market Opportunities. Marc, a pleasure to talk to you again.
Lovely to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Marc, as you know, I spoke recently with Steve Blank, who you'll be very familiar with his work as you work in a similar area. And we talked about how things essentially are really changed in terms of the models for startups, for lean startups and for everyone. And Steve's view, I suppose, is that a lot of the assumptions that were there in the past and assumptions as recently as March might have to be thrown out the window. So in the context of startups, what's your own take on that?
So I think, I'm pretty much aligned with what Steve has said. It's, of course, I have a European perspective on this, but the startup scene here in Europe has changed quite dramatically as well. The business scene as such, the economic landscape. If you think big picture, what this crisis has revealed are many deficiencies that we have in the economic system, of course, in the hospital or in the medical system. That's probably most obvious, but also in digitalization, etc. So what I think the crisis has very explicitly shown is all these deficiencies, but that's one side of it, and I think there's lots of opportunities that emerge as well. But overall, it's a change in the economic landscape, the business landscape, in such a short time that we have not witnessed probably since the Second War.
Lots of challenges there, of course, Marc, but are there opportunities as well?
I think it's, I'm a positive person, so I'm always seeing the opportunity of when something changes, there's always opportunity. There's always, Schumpeter, the famous Austrian economist, who's one of the leading thinkers in entrepreneurship. He always said there's this process of creative destruction, and that's a dynamic process. In that sense, this economic, this external shock that was induced by the pandemic created a lot of upheaval in the economic system, in the business system, as I just said. And that opens up lots of new opportunities for startups, for established firms to become find new growth turf. And I think if you look at the media reports, mostly the large corporations got a lot of visibility, so LVMH producing with, instead of perfume, the hand sanitizers, the car companies starting to produce ventilators. This is the type of agility that companies have shown in adapting to the new situation already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've of course developed your own model for this, which you call the Market Opportunity Navigator. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about the key principles of that, please?
So in essence, this is a tool that helps to promote and make tractable an entrepreneurial mindset. And this is a concept that is quite important in the 21st century, because it's about entrepreneurship, it's about finding new opportunities, and small firms, large firms, new firms, established firms, they all have the same challenge to keep abreast with technological developments, to keep up to speed. The economic crisis that we just talked about just put a looking glass on top of these changes. So the Market Opportunity Navigator is really a tool that helps you to develop a capability in this important discipline that you can frame as an entrepreneurial mindset. And what it does, it has 3 steps. It guides you through opportunity identification, finding new growth space beyond maybe even your industry boundaries. Rita McGrath would say in your arena where you can play. Second, to evaluate those opportunities. And third, to focus in a very agile manner on the most promising one or ones, depending if you're a startup or an established. Mm-hmm. So it's really a 3-step process that we guide you through, and that helps firms to develop a capability in this important discipline.
And how does this fit with the lean startup framework?
So it actually complements these existing tools of the lean startup framework quite well. The listeners, the watchers, viewers will be familiar with many of these tools: the business model canvas, agile engineering, where you develop minimum viable products, customer discovery are the 3 principal tools there. And those tools help you to understand how to play, how to really be profitable within a domain. But they don't really tell you whether this is actually a good domain to start with. You can do all kinds of efforts within that domain to be very close to a customer, but maybe other domains would be even more fruitful. And that's where the tool comes into play. That's why it's called Where to Play, this process. The book is called Where to Play, where we point out that actually there's a where to play question. And then after that, there should be the how to play question. And they are both linked. And Steve Blank, in one of the blog posts last year, he's basically, once he discovered the tool, he said, well, that's a cool tool that adds significant value to what's already out there in terms of the existing tools. And he adopted basically the tool as the fourth tool in the lean startup framework. Of course, we were extremely pleased and happy about that news,
You've observed in the past that novice entrepreneurs have this habit of falling in love with their business idea and they can't let go of it. When in reality, what they really need to do is to perhaps pivot if the idea isn't correct, or maybe abandon it. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you found out?
That's an extremely interesting question, and what I was intrigued with early on in my research is actually to understand what serial entrepreneurs, those who have done it repeatedly successful, have learned through their journey. And there's a scholar that I admire a lot, Ian Macmillan, from the Wharton School, who was really a pioneer in trying to understand this entrepreneurial mindset and what people have learned through repeatedly going through an entrepreneurial process. And what we found out in joint studies is that actually the serial entrepreneurs, they do something that the novice ones typically don't do. They look before they leap. That means they look closely at the opportunity, identify multiple ones, while the novice one tends to jump on the first opportunity they see. They fall in love immediately. Say, oh, that's great. And only realize later on that maybe the fundamental setup of the opportunity, the industry structure, something is not aligned with what they want to do, is not providing them, if you want to say so with a metaphorical term, providing them with the fertile ground to create a venture. And that's what we learned basically from all our studies, that the serial entrepreneurs have a wider view initially, then focus in a smart and agile manner. And I think that means, if you think about pivoting, what also our results show, that you probably can avoid quite a lot of pivots if you start reflecting early on a bit more and don't just have this I can do it attitude and just jump in, And I think I still have to find the first venture team or innovation team that really enjoyed pivoting. It's often a painful process. It's a process where people are engaging in new expenses. They worry. They might fight within the team because they might have leadership struggles. And all of this, if we can avoid not a little bit of that pivoting that is needed, I think the tool already helps you to make it's a big progress on that front.
So mental agility is extremely important here, that perhaps sometimes that there is a market there, but perhaps not in the way that the entrepreneur first thought about it.
Exactly, that mental agility is actually extremely fascinating, and we find it with these serial entrepreneurs. They look at their companies as organizations they design. This is quite important to understand. While the novice ones, they would be, if you want to say so, more the hamsters in a wheel, which is not surprising. They get lots of new demands that they have never been exposed to, and they easily got wound up in decision processes and don't have this outside view anymore on their organizations. And this is what the serial entrepreneurs are really good at. They have this mental agility to design their companies, to change features of the companies, so they are really masters of the companies. And just to give you a very short example, my friend John always told me, look, Mark, there are two types of firm owners, those who really own the firm, or where the firm owns them, and I think the serial entrepreneurs are really, they have this agility to reflect on their company, to change, adapt this or that way, depending on the market, depending on the competitive situation. So the tool that we have developed actually helps you to nurture this type of agility, because it's baked into the process that I outlined earlier.
One of the more interesting case studies in the book, I think, is very much about that, and it contrasts the fortune of Kodak and Fuji. One that obviously defined itself very narrowly in terms of the business, and one that saw things a little bit differently. Would you like to talk us a little bit through that one? Because I thought it was good.
That's a fascinating example. I think one where we can, when you look at it, learn a lot from. You know, both were analog film producers in that domain. Digitalization came up. They were struggling to adapt. What Fujifilm, in contrast to Kodak, understood early on is that they actually have a lot of competences that could be cross-applied, leveraged into other domains. What do I mean with this? You know, if you think about a photographic company, and they both were leaders, you know, they were really good in all kinds of chemical processes, developing film. You have to have competences for that, you know. And Fujifilm actually made a step back, you know, and then realized, well, these competences can be applied in other domains. They are nowadays leaders, you know, desalination, in the cosmetics industry, they're a key supplier. So they really rethought who they could be as a company. And what's remarkable is that they did this with the back against the wall, because their primary market was shrinking, you know, and falling apart. And Kodak was not able to do this, you know, get out of this or have this mental agility to really understand that they could actually become another type of company.
Hmm. So applying that learning, I suppose, to a startup, you need to think broadly in terms of what market that you're in, rather than being very, very narrow. But conversely, you can't have too many things going on. You really need to narrow it down to maybe a handful, a manageable number of opportunities. Yeah.
As a startup, you're in a very different situation compared to a large company. And in a startup situation, you want to make sure that you build your company on a fertile ground, you know. And I think there's a lot of ex-ante work prior to jumping in that you can do in order to understand if the basic metrics of a certain domain work in your favor or not. Once you have had this wider view, you cannot do everything. You know, you have to, you know, evaluate what you see. It's always an imperfect evaluation. Once you do something, you cannot know the future, of course, you know. But what you realize is that, well, you can learn quite a bit of about the market, about the potential within that market, about the challenges that are out there because of the competitive structure, because of funding situations, because of customer demand situations, etc. So you can wisen up a bit early on, and that will then help you to understand more clearly, well, these are better opportunities than others. And there's a second element to that that is quite important, that is mostly implicit, but once you understood it, it's quite important. Once you have seen multiple opportunities and say, hey, I could do this or that, you start thinking about your company in a different way. What do I mean with that? When you think about your company in terms of having a bouquet of opportunities in the future, a growth path from one opportunity to the next, you will choose many, you design your company in a more agile manner, almost by implication. Why? You pick, for instance, a brand name that allows you to move seamlessly from one domain to another, and don't have a brand name, pick a brand name that narrows you too much or focuses too much in one domain only. You know? And that, you know, by having a broader brand name, think about Amazon, you know, Amazon versus CD Now. Amazon can move in all kinds of directions. CD Now is trapped in this domain. If they want to sell DVDs, well, what, you know, you have to develop a new brand, you know. And this is one example, but it goes, you know, into HR, which people you hire early on. It goes into your IP strategies, etc. So it has really a profound effect on your company. You can call this here. You can put agility basically into the DNA of your company, and then move from one domain to the other.
Your fellow countryman, Alexander Osterwalder, likes to talk about making lots of small bets rather than making the loon shot, I think he calls it. Would you agree?
You know, he's looked at innovation very much from a large company perspective. You know? And I'm fully with him that you need to make lots of bets in that sense in order to find the true winners. Where I think we need to learn more is how you identify interesting new growth space. And typically, when you look at the ideas that are generated within a company, there are often many. You know? But within a company, the ideas you get are often towards the own target market. Okay, what you already have done. And when we compare this to research results by both of our friend Rita McGrath, she has really said, look, nowadays we are living in a world where you're playing in an arena. You know, if you look at the major companies, if you think about Uber, you know, Uber is not only a taxi company, they move seamlessly from taxi to food delivery to tourism, where they move tourists from A, B to C, you know, they think about them as a company that can play in many domains, okay, beyond the traditional industry boundaries. And that brings me to your question very crisply. I think you have to have a number of ideas, you know. You don't know which ones truly will work out, so you need to stay agile. However, you want to also make sure not to miss important new growth space that might lie out of your typical perspectives that are dominated by your industry, you know. And I think that's where Alex and me, if you would discuss now, would say, okay, look, how can we promote a broader view? You know, how can we promote this arena view? And I think that's where a systematic ideation beyond your core domain matters a lot. In a startup setting, you know, the question is very different. We just talked about this. I think there you cannot do 10 at once. You know, if you are 3 people, you need to focus and have a plan B maybe in your head where you devote a little time, but you need to focus, but in an agile manner, as I pointed out earlier.
I guess ultimately there's no guarantees that at some point you just have to dive in and go for it, and you know, there's no way of knowing for certain.
No, you need to learn. You know, it's like it's a learning journey, but there are different ways of learning. You can be blindly jumping in and then discover, oh, this water is full of sharks. It's not good advice in any life situation, and also not for innovators. And you can jump in by maybe looking at the water and say, is this actually some water that is warm, where I can swim well, that doesn't have too many waves, etc. You know? And I think, and just using this analogy, what we can do is to have a little bit more reflection before you do it. You know, there has been the recent 20 years probably, somehow the pendulum has swung to let's do it, you know? And that leads to, you know, oftentimes to too many pivots, you know. And I'm advocating, and there's lots of people who are realizing that, and across the globe actually, that with a little bit more reflection, you can avoid a lot of downstream effort, you know, in pivoting and other activities that waste resources and time.
And finally, Marc, can I ask you, from where you are sitting in Central Europe, in lovely Lausanne, how do you read the overall business environment there? Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic?
As a person, I'm always an optimist. So in that sense, I tend to be on the optimistic side. I forgot my crystal ball today. Sorry, so I cannot perfectly predict the situation. It really depends if there's a second wave, a third wave. If we somehow get a vaccine, a vaccination campaign. What I can say is that what makes me optimistic is the activities of the entrepreneurs I see around me. You know, there are fascinating startups. There's a startup called Technis that did smart flooring, you know, and they now have adapted to a new market, which is obviously the supermarkets, and count how many people are in the supermarkets. And that links this question to the very first question: what has changed? You know, and I think the individual entrepreneurs give me hope. You know, the innovation leaders give me hope because they realize that this is a different business constellation we are in, and let's make the best out of this, create new value by addressing unmet market needs. You know, and that's basically where our whole conversation meets again, because where it really comes to the point of saying, hey, yes, things change. Now we need to have the mental agility, the entrepreneurial mindset to make the best out of this change. And there will be strong winners coming out of this. There will be losers coming out of this. You know? Change every time has losers and winners. And I think what you can aspire to is to be a more nimble, proactive person in identifying opportunities. And I think that's the first ingredient toward this optimistic outlook that I tend to have.
Great, that's lovely, Marc. And just to say, for anyone who wants to follow up on the ideas in Marc's book, Where to Play, you can find more information and worksheets that you can download on the website wheretoplay.co. Marc, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Frank. It was a pleasure too, and all the best out there. We get it done together.
Great. Thank you, Marc.